Day one of Broncos camp is in the books, and I'm joined today by Sayre Bedinger to discuss everything that we saw from the Broncos offense, defense, and some of the storylines after day one of Broncos camp. We break it down all in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Day one of Broncos camp is in the books, ladies and gentlemen, and Sayre Bedinger and I are going to break down day one at the UCO Training Center in Inglewood, Colorado, as the Broncos got back onto the practice field in shells, helmet, and no shoulder pads, but jerseys and shorts. Sayre, my man, Broncos football is back. It was great to see fans on the berms in Dove Valley here once again, and there's just always excitement around this time of the year. I get it, every team is at 0-0. But you just can't help, I think, if you're a fan or if you're a member of the media, you can't help but feel like a sense of optimism because everybody is, like I said, winless at this point. There's a lot of excitement around the Broncos, despite all the questions at quarterback. Sayre, first off, man, how you doing?
Doing great, man. And you're right. Optimism is in the air. You know, this is the time of year when everybody's undefeated. You know, teams are mostly healthy, right, which is key for optimism. And it is exciting. It's exciting because you've got the roster out there pretty much all together. You know, not that COVID is in the rear view completely at this point, but I mean, at least compared to last year, way different circumstances and everything. So, and yeah, the fans being out there, the energy is good all around.
It is. And so let's start things off with recapping day one from the offensive side of the ball. Everyone's focused on quarterback competition. We all know Drew got the first snap on day one under center, but really want to go over some takeaways that we had. I'll start off with my first one. Really, as Vic Fangio had said on Tuesday, you're going to see a lot of different wide receivers rotating in regardless of the first team O-line, second team O-line, whoever's getting the first snap at quarterback. And we saw a contribution from a variety of guys, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Trinity Benson stepping up. You know, first and foremost, I mean, for us, I'll be at Broncos practice Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week. I'm heading up on Friday. We'll be there this weekend. But the question is, like, a lot of us were able to watch today or yesterday on the stream on Broncos Country Live. So be sure to check that out. If you're not able to attend training camp, Broncos fans, the Twitter feed, the Broncos website, they will have a daily live stream to keep you up to date on everything that's going on. So, Sayre, the offensive side of the ball, I talked about the wide receivers. What were one of your takeaways that you had from watching day one of practice?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with the stream being available, it was great to be able to see at least a few plays. Like you said, just helmets out there today, so nothing too crazy to take away, I think. But I think that you can notice a few different things here and there. Like Vic Fangio kind of warned everybody, the wide receiver depth chart is going to be shuffled all around it. You're going to have to pay attention to kind of who else is out there. So I was paying attention to the offensive line because obviously there's one, maybe two starting jobs up for grabs, and took note that Calvin Anderson is out there with the top O-line unit. So that's going to change. Vic Fangio talked about that. They're going to rotate guys in and out of there. But interesting that with veterans like Bobby Massey, Cam Fleming, that Calvin Anderson, who Vic Fangio said, you know, don't sleep on him. He's out there with the first unit. Won. So really love that. And it's something that to me shows that the Denver Broncos are invested long-term at that position, not just like, you know, Jawan James was a long-term investment, didn't work out. But now everybody's talking about, well, it's just going to be an issue again after the season, right? Well, Calvin Anderson has a chance to maybe change the narrative there.
Yeah, that would be nice to see. Garrett Bowles has obviously shown a lot of praise for him as well. Those two have done a lot of training together. You know, one thing too, Sayre, one name that dominated day one of Broncos camp, that's Jerry Jeudy, who just, we know his route running ability is absolutely impeccable, but he was making some big catches. And look, he was connecting not only just with Teddy Bridgewater, because in mandatory minicamp, everybody was talking about Teddy and Jerry, they have this connection. But Drew and Jerry Jeudy had a very strong connection day one of Broncos camp, a couple of deep 40-yard plus post patterns, some dig routes. I mean, what is the excitement level for Jerry Jeudy coming into 2021 from a Broncos perspective? I mean, he looks the part.
Yeah, no, it's huge expectations. You know, I think that people get so caught up in the drops from last year, which of course, like, we should, you know, be fair and evaluate those things. At the same time, underestimating the chip that's on Jerry Jeudy's shoulders after hearing about the drops for an entire offseason, right? And so everybody kind of assumed, you know, anybody who was really kind of thinking with some clarity really assumed like, okay, he's going to take the next step. I mean, he's been pretty unanimously the most talked about player at Broncos OTAs, now day one of training camp. I mean, everything is there for Jerry Jeudy to be an absolute superstar. We saw it at Alabama. We saw it in glimpses in his rookie season. And I do think, I mean, man, I know Cortland Sutton is kind of being eased back into things, but it does make you think, like, man, is Jeudy going to be wide receiver 1 in Denver this year? Is he going to eat up the targets? Is he going to lead the team in catches and yards? I think he could have that kind of an impact this season.
Well, I want to ask you something as well. I mean, I mentioned Trinity Benson's name earlier. He had 2 touchdown catches. Brett Rippon getting involved a little bit. Let's talk about KJ Hamler, though. He had a really great post move. He scored on a touchdown play. And then Vic Fangio mentioned his post-practice presser that they kind of pulled him late just as a precautionary because they really want to manage him this offseason because he has a history of these soft tissue muscle issues. You talk about Jerry Jeudy, but now let's talk about what the Broncos maybe could be with KJ Hamler if he can stay healthy. I mean, he is a weapon, and he was wide open. Nobody was near him.
And that's, I think, what we're going to see a lot of, right? I mean, that's the story with KJ Hamler, and Drew Locke talked about it in his post-practice press conference. He's like, if you're playing under 10 yards away from the guy, it's going to be really difficult for you to cover him, even in press man, because as small as KJ Hamler is, we saw it at Penn State. Drew Locke talked about it today. That dude is tough and physical, especially when he has the ball in his hands too. But we saw him, I can't remember the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive back that he absolutely just bowled over.
Hayden.
I think it was even, Joe Hayden, a veteran, and he just bowls him over. That's the kind of player that Hamler is. And so we talk a lot about the injuries because they're obviously a little bit concerning at this point. With the soft tissue and things like that. We want to see him on the field consistently. Don't want to hear about him getting hurt. Want him to be that major threat that he can be. But, man, that guy is tough, and he's going to be tough to cover, I think, as long as he's able to run full speed. He's a weapon out of that slot in a variety of ways. Good route runner, physical after the catch. But obviously, like we saw today, I mean, he's capable of just leaving guys in the dust before his route is even finished.
And that's going to be an important aspect for the Broncos this upcoming season as the offensive side of the ball absolutely has to take the next step forward. Regardless of who's quarterback, the personnel should be good. In Broncos country, coming up here in just a moment, Sayre and I, we're going to continue talking about day one Broncos camp recap at the UC Health Training Center. But before we do that, folks, I have to tell you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there, rockauto.com. And rockauto.com is a family-owned business that's been serving auto parts customers online for over 20 years. If you need anything for your vehicle, rockauto.com has everything. You can save time and money today at rockauto.com. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or 100% more on parts that you can get cheaper at Rock Auto? Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for everybody, whether you're a professional or a do-it-yourselfer. Not to mention, you get the parts delivered directly to your doorstep. It's easy and convenient for you rather than having to deal with intimidating questioning from somebody at a local chain auto parts store that only carries certain parts that their warehouse only happens to store. RockAuto.com has everything. You can search by make, model, year, brand, specifications, and even the prices that you prefer for your vehicle today. RockAuto.com. So head over to RockAuto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked On Broncos in there. How did you hear about us box? So that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. All right, Sayre, we talked a little bit about the offensive side of the ball. There was one note I wanted to talk about because Drew Locke also met with the media following practice on day one of Broncos camp. And it was noted that last year he was playing around 217, 218 pounds. Now he's playing about 230. And he mentioned something about a shoulder injury that he had. He seems like he has a little bit more power to him this year. I know you put out a tweet on Twitter kind of reflecting on that. I mean, how might that be able to help Drew Locke maybe even stay healthy this season or maybe have the advantage? Because we look at Josh Allen. I mean, he is a bulky guy for a quarterback, and it looks like Drew has definitely put on some of that muscle this offseason.
He does. He looks bigger, which is great. And he made a joke about, he doesn't feel like he's in the puberty mode anymore, which is, that, I mean, tongue in cheek as it is. I mean, he looked skinny out there a little bit. And you see that from young guys a lot of times, but especially coming off an upper body injury, especially one that affects your arms, that losing that natural body armor can leave you susceptible to injuries. And I think that Drew is really, over the course of 3 off seasons in the NFL, everything has kind of come to him in pieces. Whereas other guys like, Justin Herbert comes into the league, obviously really well put together, big guy, strong arm, been hit plenty of times, yada, yada, yada. Well, Drew Locke came in a completely different body type, and he came in with a completely different, set of expectations on him at the college level, where he was kind of the playmaker in the offense. Now he's being asked to do a lot of different things. He's being asked to, take on a lot more responsibility. And I think in his third offseason, he's kind of figuring out a lot of these things all at once, especially physically. To see him come in bigger, understanding the fact that, okay, I'm going to take some hard hits. I have to be able to get up. I've now had 2 kind of freakish injuries in each of my first 2 NFL. I really can't afford that this year, or I'm going to lose my job. So I think all those things are kind of coming in pieces with him, and hopefully it does translate to a little bit more, we know he can already throw the ball hard, but maybe a little bit more zip on the ball downfield, maybe a little bit more, confidence on those throws too. Not just physically, but even on the mental side.
Yeah, that'll be huge for him. That'll be huge for the Broncos. And I think you can make the argument Drew Locke right now is surrounded by more talent than he's probably ever had in his life while playing football,
yes.
Which that can create some excitement, specifically entering a second season in Pat Shurmur's offensive scheme. We'll see how things play out. But Sayre, let's shift our focus now to the defensive side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So great to see Von Miller back out there. So great to see Bradley Chubb. Now, Chubb worked off onto the side a little bit, and Vic Fangio mentioned that's going to be a little bit more of a conditioning thing for him. Obviously, the physical part, him going through the rehab from the offseason ankle surgery, that's good and done, but the conditioning side of things is what they're looking at. Now, we saw a lot of team position-specific drills today. You're going to see some guys there, but the one thing I like, Sayre, is I talked about it on Twitter too. The one thing I miss as a football player, when you're back on the football field, the helmets, you see a lot of guys taking their helmets off and putting it back on. That's because the pressure inside those inner ear pads and helmet pads, it's so tight and you have to get acclimated to it once again. That was always a fun note that I saw on the broadcast there. But the defensive side of the ball, I think that we talk about this. The Broncos have so much talent on paper, name stature, looking at different packages. Patrick Surtain, obviously the Broncos' first round overall selection in this year's NFL draft. He was working a lot in the sub packages, the nickel, the dime, not so much the base where you saw Ronald Darby and Kyle Fuller getting work in the base. Now that can change. Obviously, this was day 1 of practice. But I tell you what, I like in the dime where we see Surtain, we see Bryce Callahan, we see Ronald Darby, we see Kyle Fuller. I mean, the Broncos going DB heavy there, which I think we're going to see a lot of. What were your thoughts initially on day 1, just being able to see these different packages work in and out?
I'm with you, man. I love that. And Vic Fangio mentioned that early in the offseason that we could see more of that, especially after Surtain was acquired in the draft. I love seeing that because I think, to me, until teams prove that they're going to run for 200 yards on you every game, you've got to put your best 11 guys out there. And the Broncos, I know from last year, we were talking a lot about Justin Sternhart really getting in there and potentially being that sub package linebacker to cover. Why not just let it be Pat Surtain this year, or Bryce Callahan or something like that? And you got to get your best 11 guys out there. And we heard Justin Simmons talk about how crucial it is to have Kyle Fuller there. Just a big deal for communication for those guys. That's something that I'm most excited to see develop as training camp really progresses, how those guys communicate, how dominant they can be. It's going to be tough for those quarterbacks out there going up against that secondary. There's no doubt about it. But I think that Vic Fangio is going to be able to be as creative as we've ever seen him with this personnel that he's got at his disposal. I mean, you've got 4 guys who are cornerback 1 caliber. Let's say Surtain had been picked by Dallas. He would be their number 1 corner easily. And for the Broncos, he's number 4. And that's crazy to me. So I think you've got to find ways to get him on the field. And as you and I were talking about before the show, there was a rep where we saw him going up against Noah Fant, and he just goes toe for toe with a guy that's expected to be one of the best tight ends in the game. So, hey, that's great news too if you're talking about Travis Kelce, Darren Waller of the world, those types of guys. I mean, Surtain is maybe going to be the answer that everybody in Broncos country has been looking for, coveting. Who's going to be that coverage linebacker that can cover these tight ends? Well, defensive backs can't even do it, but maybe Patrick Surtain gives them a best shot.
Well, that was the talk, too. I was also listening to Logan and Lewis as they were there as well, talking and reporting on training camp, and they said that his size, I mean, he looks like a linebacker, but he moves like a DB. I mean, he is what we call a genetic freak. He has all the traits and all the tools to be one of the next best players in the NFL, which I think that's why the Broncos, they went out and they said, hey, look, we're going to get this guy. Contrary to the Broncos should have drafted this quarterback. That's a whole nother subject. Hopefully we don't ever have to get into after the season. Hopefully things pan out. But that play you're mentioning too about Noah Fant and Pat Surtain, it was a play, it was in the Broncos nickel package. Surtain was playing on the outside. They also had Darby rotating over. And so what happened was there was motion. So Darby bumped in. Patrick Surtain took the outside guy, which was Noah Fant, who was lined up as an inline. Noah ran a zig route, which he attacked the inside, and then he planted and pivoted outside. I mean, Patrick Surtain was not fooled one bit on that play. I mean, Noah Fant, even if a quarterback would have thrown that, it would have been a pass deflection because he was tight on it. He's so cerebral, and you can see the game. It looks so easy for him right now. And I can't wait to see that a little bit more in person on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week at the UCL Training Center. But speaking of the coverage linebacker dynamics, you did mention Justin Sternhart not too long ago, but just looking at him, his size, I mean, he looks like a physical specimen as well. I mean, the Broncos right here, and this is what I heard George Payton talking about with Dave Logan and Rick Lewis, is that they have a lot of talent on the roster. They have a lot of guys, young guys too, that they feel like can step up into a big role. When I look at the Minnesota Vikings from last year under Rick Spielman and George Payton, I mean, Sayre, they played so many young guys last year, and they still had talent. Now, while they struggled in bits and pieces, they still performed, and they have a bright future. So the Broncos, in just about 2 weeks, they're actually going to hold joint training camp practices in Minnesota with the Vikings, and now you get to smack other people. But let's talk about Justin Sternhart. We missed out on him last year. He was picking things up. He seems to be in a really good place right now.
Yeah, and that's great to notice his size too. I mean, coming off at Wake Forest, it was a biceps injury, right? And this last year was the wrist. So, I mean, for 2 upper body injuries in a row, that shows that he's doing the work to not only rehab the injury, but then compound that by getting big in the weight room, which is great. Obviously, I think Sternhart's going to be big time special teams player this year. The Broncos lost a number of guys on the special teams unit from this last year, which obviously wasn't very good. So they need somebody like him to get in there and be on their coverage units. But I think what's really interesting to me, and it'll be fascinating to see how Fangio plays this out, the contract dynamics between, guys like Sternhart, who's got 3 years left on his rookie deal, compared to guys like Jewell and Alexander Johnson, who only have 1 year left. So do you get a glimpse of your future a little bit? How many reps do you take away from those guys who, you're also stuck between that rock and a hard place with Jewell. They're going into their 3rd season in Fangio's defense. So it's a tough call for him. But at the same time, you've got to go out there and you've got to match up with the best guys that you possibly can. And I know that Sternhart didn't test as well as guys like Fred Warner, but when you watch him play at Wake Forest, that's the kind of vibe that he gave off, especially early in Fred Warner's career. I mean, he's obviously developed now into a superstar, $19 million a year linebacker. But early on, you could see that, there might be some ways that you get to other guys coming up from the college ranks. And Sternhart definitely showed that. So I think you get this guy in a lot of preseason reps, a ton of preseason reps. Put him out there with the starting defense. You don't need to see anything else from Jewell and Johnson. Put him out there with the base defense and see what he can do. Because you might be looking at a potential, I'm not saying this will happen, but Todd Davis got cut last year. You and I talking a year ago at this time would have been insane to say, hey, Todd Davis could be cut.
Yeah.
So you just never know.
Well, and I think that you mentioned too, I mean, there's other things I think that could factor in. Alexander Johnson's a big year for him. I think in terms of he's got to play really well. He's got to do what the coaches want, which is something that was discussed in the offseason. But if a guy like Justin Sternhart or even on the back end too, even Josh Watson, if they're starting to sneak up a little bit on him, I mean, the Broncos could have a brand new linebacking core entirely going into next season. We haven't even mentioned Baron Browning. He's on the PUP list. That's a whole nother conversation that we'll maybe get to hopefully in the next coming weeks if he can come off of that list. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. Sayre and I, we're going to talk about maybe what we'd like to see in day 2 of Broncos camp and some of our general takeaways coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, I have to tell you about the other sponsor of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there, betonline.ag. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your sports action. The NFL season is here. Broncos camp is ongoing. That means BetOnline will have you covered if you want to put your money on the Denver Broncos this upcoming season. You get all the latest news, odds, and info for all your sporting needs, including NFL, NHL, MLB, NBA, and all of your UFC and MMA action. You don't have to sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game with betonline.ag today. So head to the website or use your mobile device to go to the website today to sign up. And when you sign up, you can get your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use promo code Locked On. Bet Online, your online sportsbook experts. Jumping into the fourth quarter of today's episode, Locked On Broncos on your favorite audio podcasting platform, not to mention YouTube in video format. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already for daily exclusive Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage all year long, courtesy on the Locked On NFL Network. Sayre, day 2 is approaching us. And the thing I think that we'd like to see on a day-to-day basis, you'd like to see maybe some players that had an off day, maybe bounce back and improve. Now, I think for everybody, we're always going to be monitoring this quarterback situation. Drew got the first snaps on day 1. I imagine Teddy's going to get the first snaps here on day 2. The question remains, who is ahead right now? Can you even keep score after day 1 of Broncos camp at the quarterback competition? From the looks of it, both quarterbacks had a pretty decent day. Nothing too detrimental, I would say, happened.
Yeah, definitely agreed on that. And of course, like in the interest of great competition, I'd love to see both guys come out tomorrow and have a great day. Vic Fangio talked about kind of wanting this thing to naturally separate itself. Either Locke or Bridgewater, one of them will be obviously head and shoulders above the other. I'd love to see both guys come out and have big days. And that's selfish on the part of, the fandom and people. We want to see these guys really both be good and give the Broncos the opportunity to win. But of course, like what I'm looking for on day 2 of camp, I would love to see a little bit more from Sutton. We didn't hear his name called a lot today. Obviously they're easing him in. And I wasn't able to watch the entire practice, so I have no idea if he made big plays that we didn't get to see. But I would love to hear his name called a little bit more, just to get reinforced that hey, Courtland Sutton is back, and Tim Patrick as well. We know what those guys are capable of doing. They're more proven than the other guys on the roster, surely, but love to see a little bit more from those two guys on day 2 and get their QBs that support they need for sure.
Yeah, that'll be huge because, I was going to mention we didn't really hear too much about Tim Patrick's name. Not sure if that was really just a coverage dynamic of maybe the Broncos, maybe the defense. They focused on the size, and that's where Jerry Jeudy, guys like KJ Hamler, Trinity Benson came in and had success. Now also another quarterback that's not going to be talked about enough, but I tell you what, I really like Brett Rippon, and I think that for him, where he is at, he is in a mode where he can be a backup quarterback. I feel like he can really be a veteran guy. We talk about guys like Chase Daniel. I think that Brett Rippon could be the next Chase Daniel. He's very smart. He's very cerebral. Yeah. And look, if you absolutely have to throw him into a game, he's not going to really put you in a position where it's going to hurt you. Now, I know a lot of people, once they hear me say this, they're going to say, well, what about the New York Jets game? He threw 3 interceptions. Those were really bad just decisions. Those were him forcing the ball out when he didn't need to. One of them he should have thrown out of, like he tried throwing it away, but it didn't float. It was one of those Trevor Siemian throws. I think Brett Rippon has learned a little bit from that. I mean, I think a lot of people forget that when Brett Rippon came in against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he started to move the ball downfield. He recognized where the blitz was coming from. Teddy Bridgewater, Drew Locke, I agree with you. I think that we need to see them have another really good day. It doesn't hurt anybody. I don't even think it puts the Broncos in a bad position if both of these guys have really good days back to back. And it makes the quarterback competition, I think, better because if one guy's playing significantly better than the other, well, the competition may not last too long. And I know Broncos fans want an answer right away. Sayre, I do want to ask you, I'm on the board. I still believe Drew Locke will win the competition this year, and I think that he'll get this year to really prove it. Do you see that happening, or do you think that Teddy Bridgewater might come in and maybe steal that?
I really see Drew winning the competition, barring a total collapse.
Yeah.
It's best for the organization that Drew wins it. That's just a flat out truth, and that's nothing against Teddy Bridgewater. The team brought him in to provide necessary competition, which Jeff Driscoll was not doing last year.
Yeah.
Brett Rippon doesn't have the same upside as Drew Locke. Not even Teddy Bridgewater has the same upside as Drew Locke, in my opinion. And Bridgewater was drafted, 10 slots higher. So I think what Bridgewater brings to the table is what I believe it was somebody at DNVR. I can't remember who it was that said that he raises the floor of the QB room. I love the way that they put that because that's exactly what it does. If Drew Locke over the course of the first 5-6 games is not up to snuff, then you've got a guy that's proven himself with really good rosters, like in New Orleans, like when he was with Minnesota when they were potential Super Bowl contenders.
Oh, yeah.
He played well.
I remember that. Against the Broncos too.
Against the Broncos, against the no-fly zone. I'll never forget Teddy Bridgewater and Stephon Diggs just carving up the no-fly zone, man. That was impressive when they were both really young players. So those guys, they've proven, Bridgewater has proven when he's on a great team, he can play well. He's at his best. But at the same time, with Drew Locke, we've seen over the course of the last 2 years, the final 5 games of 2019 played really well in 4 out of those 5 games. The final 6 games in 2020 played really well in the majority of those final 6 games, and really well as compared to, what I would say is a fair curve for young quarterbacks. So I think that he played a lot smarter in those games, even if you don't want to say that he played really well. I think that he played a lot smarter. I think that he played efficient. I think that he played to the level that I think is kind of the baseline of what he should be capable of on a consistent basis. So you put those two together, I think you've got just a recipe for a much higher upside with Drew. And so I do think he wins the job.
One thing, too, that was talked about, Logan and Lewis, the Broncos running back room right now, they have guys that are a combination of size and speed. Levante Bellamy, a guy who can get downfield. We mentioned special teams earlier. The Broncos, they need a lot of help. And Tom McMahon had told us earlier this offseason during mandatory camp is that there's a lot of young guys. There's a lot of rookies that are coming on to special teams, and they don't act like rookies, which is great. You pick it up. I imagine we saw Joe Jones depart for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this offseason. I imagine that Josh Watson or Justin Sternhart might be in a position to be what Joe Jones was for the Broncos special teams unit. And if we go back and we know what Joe Jones did, he was a key special teams ace. He was a special teams captain for the team. And I think that your inside backers specifically that have that captain-like status, this is how we discovered Wesley Woodyard back in the day. Could Justin Sternhart or Josh Watson be the next Wesley Woodyard? That is something I'm going to keep my eye on throughout Broncos camp. But Sayre, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. Broncos camp is back, ladies and gentlemen. Day 2 is going to be kicking off here very shortly. And we're going to have you covered here on the Locked on Broncos podcast. We're also going to be out there at the UCL Training Center Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week, up close and personal to see practice. And we'll provide you with coverage and reaction immediately afterwards. But with that said, Sayre, my man, thank you so much.
Appreciate you, Cody. Thank you.